The morning was filled with soft sunshine, and the sound of birds outside made the day feel bright and peaceful. In a small house at the edge of the town, a couple prepared for the most important day of their lives. Maria, a young woman in her late 20s, was 9 months pregnant. Her husband, Daniel, had been awake since dawn, pacing back and forth, checking every little thing. Maria sat on the edge of the bed, one hand resting on her growing belly. She felt the gentle kicks inside, each one reminding her that her baby was almost ready to come into the world. Her face showed both excitement and nervousness. She had been waiting for this moment for so many months, but now that it had arrived, the fear of the unknown mixed with her joy. Daniel bent down and tied Maria's shoes carefully. He looked at her with soft eyes and said, "Everything will be fine. Today we are going to meet our baby." His words made her smile, though she was still uneasy. They had planned everything with care. The bag for the hospital was ready, filled with baby clothes, blankets, and the small cap that Maria had chosen weeks ago. Daniel carried the bag and helped Maria to the car. On the drive, he kept one hand on the wheel and the other gently resting on her hand, squeezing it from time to time. The city streets were busy, but to them, the world outside felt silent. Their focus was only on the life they were about to welcome. Maria leaned back in her seat, breathing slowly, trying to stay calm. She whispered, "I hope the doctors take good care of us." When they reached the hospital, Daniel parked quickly and hurried around to help her out of the car. The hospital building stood tall, its glass windows reflecting the morning light. To Daniel, it looked like a place of safety. He felt grateful that they had made it here on time. Inside, the waiting area was full of people. Some looked tired, others looked restless, and a few were holding papers in their hands. Daniel helped Maria walk to the reception desk. She placed her hand on her stomach, her breathing heavier now. The receptionist glanced up briefly, then back down at her computer. Daniel cleared his throat politely and said, "My wife is in labor. We need to see a doctor quickly." His voice was calm but carried urgency. The receptionist gave them a form to fill. Daniel hesitated, looking at Maria's discomfort, but then quickly wrote down the details. As he returned the form, he noticed that the woman behind the desk barely looked at Maria. Instead, she stamped the paper and pointed to a row of chairs. Maria sat down slowly, holding Daniel's hand tightly. Minutes felt longer than hours. Daniel kept watching the doors where doctors walked in and out. He thought someone would soon call them, but no one came. Maria leaned against him and whispered, "Something doesn't feel right. The baby is moving too much." Her eyes filled with worry. Daniel brushed her hair gently and said, "Don't worry, they will call us soon." But inside he felt uneasy. As time passed, Daniel noticed other people being attended to. Nurses moved quickly, guiding some patients into rooms, yet Maria remained seated waiting. Her discomfort grew, and Daniel could see the change in her face. He stood up and walked to the desk again. "Excuse me," he said firmly, "my wife needs attention. She is in labor." The receptionist nodded but continued typing. "Please wait, the doctor will see you soon," she replied. Daniel returned to his seat, trying not to show his frustration. He held Maria's hand and whispered positive words, but inside his heart a storm was rising. The hospital that once looked like a place of safety now felt cold and distant. Maria closed her eyes, breathing harder, while Daniel silently prayed for someone to notice them. At that moment, they did not know that this delay would soon change everything. Daniel kept glancing at the clock on the wall, watching the minutes slip away. Each tick of the second hand felt heavier on his chest. Maria sat beside him, leaning against the chair with her hands folded over her stomach. She tried to smile at him, but her eyes showed the truth. She was uncomfortable and anxious. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked softly. Maria shook her head slightly. "The baby is pushing more now. I feel pressure. It's not normal to just sit here." Her words made Daniel's worry grow stronger. He stood up again and walked to the desk, where the receptionist was still busy typing. His voice was polite but more urgent this time. "My wife cannot wait much longer. Please, she needs to be checked now." The receptionist looked up briefly, then back at her screen. "The doctor is busy. You will be called soon," she replied flatly. Daniel felt a wave of frustration, but he held it back. He didn't want to upset Maria even more. He walked back and sat down beside her, holding her hand tighter than before. He whispered, "Stay strong. I'm here with you." The baby is strong too. Maria nodded but shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The waiting area around them felt louder now. The ringing phones, the footsteps of nurses, the murmurs of other patients. To Daniel, all of it blurred together as he focused only on Maria's face. After what felt like forever, a nurse finally walked past them. Daniel quickly stood up and called, "Excuse me, my wife is in labor. Can you please help us?" The nurse glanced at Maria but didn't stop walking. "Fill the form and wait," she said over her shoulder. Daniel clenched his jaw, his patience slipping away, but he forced himself to stay calm for Maria's sake. Maria placed her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Why are they not listening? Do they not see what is happening?" Her voice was soft, almost breaking. Daniel stroked her hair and said, "Don't think about them. Think about the baby. Everything will be fine. I'll make sure of it." His words carried strength, but deep inside he was scared. Another 20 minutes passed. Daniel saw patients who came after them being guided inside. Some were given wheelchairs. Some were taken to private rooms. Every time a door opened, he hoped to hear Maria's name, but it never came. Maria's breathing grew heavier. She squeezed his hand so tightly that his fingers hurt, but he didn't move. Instead, he whispered encouragements, telling her stories about the future, how their child would smile at them, how they would hold the baby for the first time, how their lives would change in the best way. But with every passing moment, Daniel's heart sank. Something was not right. Maria's face looked pale, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Daniel, I can't sit like this any longer. Please do something." Her plea broke him inside. He stood up once again and walked straight to the desk, his voice firmer than before. "This is an emergency. My wife is not well. She cannot wait any longer." The receptionist sighed as if annoyed and slowly picked up the phone. She made a short call and then said without looking at him, "Someone will come soon." Daniel felt his hands tremble, not with anger but with fear. He returned to Maria, sitting beside her again. "They said someone will come," he whispered, though his heart doubted the promise. Minutes later, a doctor finally walked out of the hallway. Daniel stood up quickly, ready to explain everything, but the doctor walked past them without even noticing Maria. His white coat swayed as he disappeared into another room. Maria closed her eyes and whispered, "Why is nobody listening to us?" Tears rolled down her cheeks silently. Daniel hugged her shoulders gently. "I will not let anything happen to you," he promised in a quiet but firm tone. The waiting area around them still bustled with activity, yet for Daniel and Maria, time felt frozen. The baby inside Maria moved restlessly, as if asking to be heard too. And as Daniel sat there watching his wife struggle, he realized something deep inside him. If no one was going to take them seriously, he would have to find another way to make them listen. The moment was coming when his calm patience would be tested. He knew he could not wait much longer. Daniel sat with Maria, watching her carefully. Her breathing was no longer steady. She shifted in her seat, pressing her hand against her stomach again and again. Daniel could see the discomfort written across her face, and it tore him apart inside. He leaned closer and whispered, "Hold on, Maria. Just a little longer. I'll make them listen." Maria tried to nod, but her eyes filled with tears. "Daniel, I feel weak. I can't explain it, but something is wrong." Her words echoed in his heart. He could not sit quietly anymore. Daniel stood up again and walked straight to the reception desk. His voice was steady but strong. "My wife is in serious pain. She is about to give birth. If you don't act now, it may be too late." The receptionist glanced at him with the same careless look. "Sir, please take a seat. We will call you when the doctor is ready." Daniel froze for a moment, trying to understand how someone could be so calm while his wife was struggling. He wanted to shout, but he remembered Maria needed him to stay collected. He inhaled deeply and turned back to her. When he sat beside her, Maria looked at him with tired eyes. "They still won't listen?" she asked weakly. "No, but I will not stop," Daniel answered firmly. He held her hand tightly, trying to give her strength through his touch. Around them, the waiting area continued as usual. A family laughed softly on one side. A nurse called out another patient's name, and the television in the corner played an old health program. But for Daniel and Maria, none of it mattered. Their world was shrinking into a single moment of fear and waiting. Maria leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder. He felt her body trembling slightly, and he knew he could not wait much longer. He stood up again, this time not going to the desk but walking toward the hallway where the doctors disappeared. "Sir, you cannot go there," a nurse called out quickly. Blocking his way, Daniel raised his hands gently. "Please listen to me. My wife is in labor. She cannot wait anymore. She needs help right now." The nurse looked uncomfortable, glancing back toward the desk. "I will see what I can do," she muttered and walked away. Daniel stood there, his heart pounding, waiting for her to return. Back in the chair, Maria whispered to herself, praying softly. She thought about the small clothes folded in the bag Daniel had brought. She thought about the nursery they had prepared at home, the little bed waiting for the baby. The picture of their child was so close, yet in this cold waiting area it felt impossibly far. Daniel returned to her side. "I stopped the nurse. She said she will see what she can do," he explained. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't enough. Maria nodded slowly, her eyes half closed. "Thank you," she whispered, though her voice was weak. Minutes stretched again. Daniel tapped his foot nervously against the floor. Every sound around him felt louder now, pressing into his ears. His patience was wearing thin, but his love for Maria kept him steady. He looked at her pale face and thought, "I cannot let her suffer like this anymore." Finally, the same nurse returned, holding a clipboard. She said quickly, "Follow me." Relief rushed through Daniel's chest. He helped Maria up carefully, supporting her as they walked down the hallway. But instead of taking them to a delivery room, the nurse led them to another waiting area, smaller but still crowded. She gestured to the chairs. "Please wait here. The doctor will come soon." Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "Wait again?" His voice cracked with frustration. "Yes," the nurse replied simply before walking away. Maria sank into the chair, exhausted. Daniel knelt beside her, holding her hands. He whispered, "Stay strong, Maria. I promise you I will not let this continue." She looked into his eyes, her own filled with tears. "I trust you," she said softly. At that moment, Daniel realized something important. The system around them was blind to their pain, deaf to their words. If he wanted his wife and child to be safe, he would need to find a way to break through the silence of this hospital. His mind began to race. He did not know yet what he would do, but he knew this. He could no longer sit quietly and wait. Something inside him was changing. And soon, everyone would see it. The new waiting area felt even colder than the first. The walls were plain, the chairs stiff, and the air heavy with silence. Maria leaned back slowly, her face pale, her breathing uneven. Daniel sat beside her, his eyes never leaving her for a second. "Hold on, Maria," he whispered gently, brushing her hair back from her face. "We are closer now. Someone will come," but Maria's hand squeezed his tightly. "Daniel, I feel different. The baby is pressing harder. I can't wait much longer." Her words pierced him like a blade of worry. He nodded quickly, trying to hide his fear. "I know, just stay with me. I'll get help." Daniel stood up again, scanning the hallway for a doctor. He saw nurses rushing past with files, talking quickly to one another, but none of them stopped to look at Maria. He raised his hand, calling out politely, "Excuse me, please. My wife is in labor. She cannot wait." One nurse turned her head briefly but kept walking. Another muttered, "The doctor will come soon." It was the same line he had been hearing for over an hour. Daniel felt a storm building inside him, but he controlled it. He walked back and knelt beside Maria. Her face showed exhaustion, but her eyes still searched his with trust. "You promised me everything will be fine," she whispered. "And it will," Daniel said, his voice steady though his heart raced. "I will not let anything happen to you or the baby." Maria leaned against him, breathing harder now. Each moment felt heavier. Daniel noticed how her hands gripped her stomach, how her body trembled. He wanted to believe everything was normal, but deep inside, he knew they had already waited too long. He looked around the room. Families sat quietly, whispering to each other. A young boy flipped through a magazine. A man scrolled on his phone, and an elderly woman dozed off in her chair. None of them saw the urgency in Maria's condition. Daniel stood once again, this time walking farther down the hallway. He spotted a doctor stepping out of a room, adjusting his glasses. Daniel hurried forward, his voice filled with desperation. "Doctor, please, my wife is in labor. She is in serious pain. Can you check her right now?" The doctor frowned slightly. flipping through the papers in his hand. Without even looking at Maria, he said, "Please wait. The nurse will call you when it's your turn." Then he walked away. Daniel froze in disbelief. He turned back toward Maria, his fists tightening at his sides. How could they not see what was happening? How could they treat her as if she were invisible? He walked back to her quickly. Maria looked weaker now, her breathing shallow. She whispered, "Daniel, promise me you will not leave me here." His heart broke at her words. He sat beside her, holding her hand with both of his. "I will never leave you, Maria. Never." For a few moments, silence surrounded them. Daniel's mind raced with thoughts. He remembered the dreams they had shared, the baby's first steps, the birthdays, the laughter they would fill their home with. All of it was at risk because the hospital refused to act. He realized then that patience was no longer an option. If he kept waiting, the situation could turn worse. He had to take action, not tomorrow, not later, but now. Daniel stood up slowly, his face calm but his heart determined. He looked around the room once more. The doctors and nurses were busy, but he knew he had to make them see. He whispered to Maria, "Stay strong. I'm going to make them listen." Maria's tired eyes met his, and though she was weak, she gave him a small nod. She trusted him completely. Daniel took a deep breath, his mind clear. The man who had entered this hospital with patience and faith was no longer the same. He had been tested too long. Now he was ready to do whatever it took to protect his wife and child. The silence of the hospital would soon be broken. Daniel stood tall in the hallway, his heart racing but his face calm. For hours he had waited with patience, but now he knew waiting was no longer enough. His wife needed help, and if no one was going to listen, then he would have to make them listen. Maria sat in the chair, her head resting on the wall, her breathing uneven. She whispered softly, "Daniel, don't leave me too long." He quickly knelt down beside her. "I'm not leaving you. I'll just be right here, making sure someone finally does their job." He kissed her hand gently, then stood again with a determined look. The hallway buzzed with movement. Nurses carried charts. Doctors walked quickly with papers in their hands, but everyone acted as though Maria was invisible. Daniel took a deep breath and stepped into the center of the hallway. "Excuse me," he said, his voice loud enough for people nearby to hear. "My wife is in labor and has been waiting for hours. She needs help right now." A few heads turned, but most continued walking. Daniel's voice grew stronger. "She is in serious pain and no one is paying attention. I will not sit quietly anymore." The waiting families looked up curiously. Some whispered to each other, some nodded as if agreeing. A few even looked at Maria with concern, but the hospital staff still moved with the same calm indifference. Daniel's chest tightened. He raised his voice again, this time louder and filled with urgency. "If my wife does not receive help right now, I will not allow this hospital to continue ignoring her. Everyone here deserves care. My wife deserves care." The room grew quieter. The receptionist at the desk shifted uncomfortably. A nurse paused, glancing nervously toward the doctor's offices. Maria watched Daniel with weak but proud eyes. She could see the strength in him now, the courage that came from love. A doctor finally stepped out from a side door, adjusting his coat. He frowned as he looked toward Daniel. "Sir, please lower your voice. You are disturbing the patients." Daniel turned to him sharply. "Disturbing the patients? My wife is a patient. She has been waiting here for hours in labor, and no one has done anything. She cannot wait any longer." His words rang through the hallway, firm and clear. For the first time, silence followed. The doctor glanced at Maria, noticing her pale face and weak posture. "Still," he said, "we are very busy. You must wait your turn." Daniel shook his head slowly. "No, not anymore. My wife's turn is now. If you refuse to act, then this hospital will answer for it." The family sitting nearby began murmuring. Some stood up, supporting Daniel's words. One man said loudly, "He's right. We've been watching them ignore her. She needs help." Another woman added, "This is not fair. She should be treated first." The voices grew, filling the waiting area. The staff could no longer ignore the situation. Maria's eyes glistened as she watched. She whispered weakly, "Daniel, you are standing for me." He knelt beside her quickly and whispered back, "I will always stand for you. I will not let anyone treat you like you don't matter." The doctor, clearly pressured by the growing noise, finally signaled to a nurse. "Prepare a room for her," he said reluctantly. The nurse nodded and hurried down the hallway. Daniel's heart pounded with relief. He held Maria's hand as the nurse returned with a wheelchair. Gently, he helped her sit, staying by her side as they wheeled her down the hall. For the first time since arriving, Maria felt a small spark of hope. But Daniel's eyes were not calm. Even as he walked beside her, his mind replayed everything they had just faced. The cold looks, the endless waiting, the careless responses, it all stayed with him. He whispered to Maria, "I'm here now, right next to you. They cannot ignore us anymore." Maria smiled faintly, her strength almost gone, but her trust in him unshaken. As the doors opened to the delivery ward, Daniel knew this was only part of the battle. He had forced them to act, but the hospital still did not truly care. He had spoken loudly, and they had listened only because they had no choice. Inside his heart, a quiet promise grew stronger. When this was over, the hospital would never forget what happened today. Maria was finally inside the delivery ward. The white walls, the smell of disinfectant, and the hum of machines surrounded her. For a moment she thought relief had come, but soon she realized the struggle was not yet over. A nurse helped her onto a bed, adjusting the thin sheets beneath her. Daniel stood close, never letting go of her hand. His eyes moved quickly around the room. Nurses walked in and out, doctors passed by with charts, but no one stayed near Maria long enough to truly check her. Maria's breathing grew heavier. She whispered, "Daniel, they still aren't looking at me. Why are they delaying?" Daniel leaned closer, brushing her forehead gently. "Stay calm, Maria, I'm right here." "They will have to listen." A nurse entered briefly, checking the monitor by Maria's side. She wrote something down on her paper and left without a word. Daniel frowned and called out, "Wait, what about her? What is happening?" But the nurse disappeared through the door. Maria closed her eyes, gripping his hand tighter. "Daniel, I don't feel good. I feel weak." His heart tightened. He pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down, holding her hand with both of his. "Stay with me, Maria. You are the strongest woman I know. Our baby is strong too. You will both be fine." But as the minutes passed, Daniel noticed the same pattern as before, movement around them but no real attention. Other women were being guided into nearby rooms, some receiving care faster than Maria. Once again, she was made to wait. Daniel stood up and walked toward a nurse's station nearby. "Excuse me," he said firmly. "My wife is in serious pain. She cannot wait. Please bring a doctor now." The nurse looked up briefly and said, "The doctor will come soon. Please be patient." Daniel's patience, however, had already worn thin hours ago. He looked back at Maria lying weakly on the bed and felt anger rising, not the kind that lashes out, but the kind that makes a man stronger, more determined. He returned to Maria's side and whispered, "They are still ignoring us. But don't worry, I will not let it continue. I will speak again, louder this time." Maria opened her eyes and whispered, "I trust you." Even in her pain, her faith in him was unshaken. Daniel stood in the middle of the ward, his voice carrying through the room. "My wife has been waiting since morning. She is in labor and cannot be ignored any longer. If you refuse to help her, then this hospital will answer to me." The words caught the attention of families and staff around. Some patients looked on with sympathy, while a few nurses exchanged nervous glances. Finally, a doctor entered, holding a chart. He walked to Maria's bed, placing the stethoscope on her stomach briefly. His expression showed no urgency. He simply wrote something down and told the nurse, "Prepare her, but not yet. Finish the others first." Daniel felt his chest tighten with disbelief. "Not yet?" "She has been waiting for hours. She is weak. She needs help now." The doctor looked at him calmly and said, "We have a process. Wait your turn." Then he walked away. Maria looked at Daniel, her eyes watery. "Why are they treating us like this?" she whispered. Daniel sat beside her again, his hand shaking as he held hers. "I don't know, Maria, but I do know this. I will not let them ignore us anymore. You and our baby are my world. If they won't move, I will make them move." Maria's weak smile appeared for a moment. "You always protect me." Daniel leaned closer and whispered, "Always. Nothing will stop me." He looked around the ward, his eyes sharp and filled with determination. He had tried politeness, patience, and calm words. None of it had worked. The hospital was failing them again and again. But now Daniel felt something new inside him, an unshakable resolve. He no longer planned to simply ask. He was ready to take control. The time had come for him to act, and once he did, the hospital would have no choice but to listen. The night outside was calm, but inside the hospital the air was heavy. Daniel sat beside Maria, watching her every movement. Her face was pale, her lips dry, and her hand weakly rested on his. Each time she shifted, Daniel's heart tightened. He had waited long enough. He had asked politely, pleaded, and even raised his voice, yet nothing truly changed. The doctors and nurses still walked past them as though they were invisible. The system was built on delay, and delay was something Maria could no longer afford. Daniel stood slowly, his tall frame casting a shadow over the small ward light. He looked down at Maria and whispered, "I promised you I will not let them forget you. Now I will keep that promise." Maria looked at him with tired eyes. "Be careful," she whispered softly. Daniel kissed her forehead gently. "For you and for our baby I will be strong." He stepped out of the room, walking into the hallway with firm strides. The hospital staff were still moving back and forth, their clipboards and files in hand. Daniel went straight to the center of the ward and stopped, his voice rising clear and steady. "Listen, everyone. My wife has been in labor for hours and she has been ignored again and again. This is not care. This is neglect. I will not allow this to continue." The patients sitting nearby lifted their heads, whispering among themselves. Families began to gather closer, listening. Some nodded, remembering how they too had been kept waiting. Daniel continued, his voice stronger now. "I came here trusting this hospital, trusting that my wife and my child would be safe. But I see nothing but delay. If you refuse to act, then I will not allow this hospital to continue as if nothing is wrong. I will shut it down with my own voice and make the world see." The room fell silent. Nurses exchanged uneasy looks. The receptionist from earlier peeked into the ward nervously. Maria's weak voice could be heard from her bed, faint but steady. "Daniel is right." Her words carried through the room, soft but powerful. Daniel's chest lifted with courage. He turned to the families and said, "All of you have seen it. They ignored her while others were taken inside. They told us again and again to wait. If they can ignore her, they can ignore anyone. This is not how a hospital should be." Murmurs of agreement spread. A father holding his child stood up and said loudly, "He's right. They treat us the same way. We all sit and wait while our loved ones suffer." The voices grew, filling the hallway. For the first time, the staff could no longer hide the truth. The noise spread through the building, echoing in every corridor. A senior doctor finally appeared, his expression tense. He raised his hand, asking for quiet, but the crowd only grew louder. Daniel stepped forward, his voice calm but unshakable. "We don't need silence. We need action. My wife is not a number on a chart. She is a human being and she needs care right now. If you refuse, then I will make sure this hospital is held accountable." The senior doctor looked at Daniel, then at Maria lying weakly on the bed. For the first time, there was hesitation in his eyes. The crowd of patients and families stared at him, waiting. Daniel crossed his arms firmly. "I will not move from here until my wife is taken care of. And no other patient should be treated this way ever again. This hospital will no longer run on neglect. If you won't act, then I will make sure this place shuts down for good." His words rang like a bell. The patients clapped softly, some even raising their voices in support. The hospital staff stood frozen, unsure how to respond. Maria watched from her bed, her eyes wet with tears. She whispered softly, "Daniel, you are my strength." Daniel looked back at her and gave a small nod. "And you are my heart." The hospital had reached a turning point. The silence of neglect had been broken, replaced by the echo of voices demanding justice. Daniel had made his stand and the hospital could no longer hide from it. The hospital hall was no longer quiet. The voices of patients and families filled the air. Daniel stood strong in the middle, his presence like a wall no one could ignore. For the first time since their arrival, all eyes were on him and his words had changed the atmosphere completely. The senior doctor cleared his throat, realizing that the situation had gone too far. He stepped forward, his face pale, and spoke in a softer tone. "We will prepare a room for your wife right now. The medical team will check her immediately." Daniel did not move, his voice steady. "This is not only about my wife. This is about every person waiting here. No one should be treated like they don't matter. Promise us that things will change." The patients clapped softly, some nodding in agreement. The doctor looked around, seeing the determined faces of the crowd. He sighed, lowered his head, and finally said, "You are right. We have failed in our duty tonight. I will take responsibility. Your wife will be taken in first, and I will personally oversee her case." Two nurses rushed forward with a stretcher. For the first time, their eyes showed care and not avoidance. They gently helped Maria onto the stretcher. Daniel walked beside her, holding her hand tightly. Maria smiled faintly, her voice weak but filled with relief. "You did it, Daniel. You made them listen." Daniel bent closer, whispering, "I only did what any husband would do, but it was your strength that gave me the courage." As Maria was taken to the delivery room, the families in the waiting hall clapped louder, their voices echoing like thunder. Some even cheered Daniel's name softly, as if he had spoken for all of them. Inside the delivery room, the doctors worked quickly. Machines beeped, gloves were pulled on, and instructions were given. Daniel stood near the door, watching carefully. His heart raced with fear and hope, but now there was finally a sense of action. Maria's breathing grew steadier as the medical team surrounded her with care that had been missing for hours. Time passed slowly. Daniel kept his hands together, silently praying for his wife and child. Every sound from the room made his heart jump, but he refused to leave. He had waited too long, fought too hard to step away now. At last, the sound they had been waiting for filled the room, the soft, sharp cry of a newborn child. Daniel's eyes filled with tears instantly. Maria, exhausted but glowing with relief, looked at him from the bed and whispered, "It's our baby." Daniel's lips trembled as he stepped closer. The nurse gently placed the tiny baby in Maria's arms. She held the child carefully, her eyes shining with love. Daniel leaned over, wrapping his arms around both of them, his heart overwhelmed with joy. For a moment, the world outside did not exist. There was only Maria, the baby, and Daniel's silent promise that they would always be protected. Later that night, as Maria rested with the baby sleeping peacefully beside her, Daniel walked back into the waiting hall. The same patients and families who had supported him looked up. Daniel spoke with a calm voice. "My wife and child are safe now, but I did not stand up tonight only for myself. I stood for all of you, for everyone who feels invisible in this place. Hospitals should heal, not ignore. I hope tonight will be the start of change." A grandmother in the corner smiled and said, "You gave us hope, son. Maybe now they will listen to us too." The senior doctor, still present, nodded quietly. His expression was no longer defensive but thoughtful. "This hospital will review its ways. I promise you this will not be repeated." Daniel gave a small nod. He knew promises were easy, but change required effort. Still, he believed something had shifted tonight. The silence of neglect had been broken, and once broken, it could never return the same way. As dawn approached, the city lights faded into the first glow of morning. Inside the hospital room, Maria held their baby close while Daniel sat beside her, his hand on both of them. They had been through pain, fear, and waiting, but now they had reached a moment of peace. Daniel whispered softly, "You are safe. Both of you are safe now." Maria closed her eyes, smiling gently, and the baby stirred in her arms. For them, this was the beginning of a new chapter, written not with fear but with strength and love. And though the hospital stood tall as before, it was no longer the same. That night had changed it. The voices of the ignored had finally been heard, and one determined husband had reminded everyone that silence can be broken when love refuses to give up.